Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And today we have a special 2-for-1 special on Alaska crime writers. We have Marc Cameron is going to be discussing his brand new book, Bone Rattle. Let me see if Barbara's holding it up too. There we go. And it's a special guest today. Dana Stabenow is going to be discussing, well, she won't be discussing her work, but I do have handy
I will.
some more signed copies of her latest book, Spoils of the Dead. And so I didn't want to be remiss in holding that up too. But, and then Barbara is joining in from her home office. And as usual, I'm going to be monitoring the Facebook comments. So if you have questions for Marc or Dana, go ahead and put them in the comments field, and I will be happy to ask some of those. And I'll magically reappear in about 30 minutes or 40 minutes, depending upon how things go. So Barbara, I'll turn it over to you for the moment.
Thanks very much, Patrick.
Thanks,
Great
Patrick.
to see you, Dana. I miss you. And Marc, it's lovely to see you too. So I thought that it would be fun to talk about, let's start out by talking about Alaska as an extraction state. Dana has given me any amount of history along those lines, but you know, is that the principal industry, you guys, in Alaska?
It's pretty much the only one.
Yep,
And we pull
yep.
stuff out, Barbara. We pull stuff out of the ground and we pull stuff out of the water. That's what we do.
Out of the ground and out of the water. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, it's easy to think about the pipeline, or it's easy to think about the greatest catch and all the rest of it. But Dana, you've written about a gold mine in the Kate Shugak series, and this book with Marc starts out at the site of a abandoned gold mine that's being, I think I'm right, that's being redeveloped, right? So I thought when I started out and I saw this innocent archaeologist on the site, and I thought, this is really dangerous for this guy, because if they find anything, and I guess an interesting question would be, you know, do archaeologists actually need security working at a site like that? And certainly this guy does.
Yeah, I that character is sort of inspired by a friend of my youngest son's who's half Alaska Native and half Hawaiian Native, or Native Hawaiian. And he's an archaeologist. He got his master's degree from UAF, and his job principally now is in Hawaii doing exactly what the Isaac Merkuliev character does. And I chatted with him about it on the phone, and he said, you know, in fact, I said, do you mind if I kill you off in a book? And he would you talk to me? And he said, no, that's really, he said, I could find a bottle from the 1920s and it won't halt the dig. You know, he's helping with like electric lines and things like that. He said it won't halt the dig forever, but it halts the dig for a while, and time is money. And so, you know, he hasn't felt like he's going to be murdered, but it certainly makes for tense times.
So are Alaskans the people who are doing the extracting, or these are outside interests taking advantage of what's in Alaska, Dana?
It's almost invariably outside interest.
So
Yes.
they don't have any real stake in the local community other than trying to get out whatever they can, huh?
They always sell it as local jobs,
Yeah.
but there are never as many jobs as they say there are going to be, and they never last as long as they say they're going to.
Yeah, it's a I mean, I'm not, and I hope I didn't come across in this book as being anti-miner. I have friends that are miners. Sandra Brannon, we had a chat the other night, but you know, she was mentioning to me that she, her family won an environmental award before the government forced them to do environmental things. So there are good miners and bad miners, certainly, are good extractors, and we need, you know, if you're going to talk on a cell phone or on this computer, we need rare earth elements and that sort of thing. But certainly, you know, and I don't want to get political here, but Pebble Mine and other things, there's certainly some pretty stark issues that need to be explored, balancing fish and Native people's rights and Alaskans' rights versus money. You know,
Marc, are you home now?
I am. Just
Are
got
you
home
rushing
yesterday.
did you look at the news today before
I
you got
haven't.
on?
No, I
Oh
haven't.
yeah. Governor Dunleavy has just recommended that they start punching holes for natural gas in Kachemak Bay.
In Kachemak, really?
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the history of the area, but basically
Yeah.
due to their own ineptitude, the fossil fuel companies, oil companies, and natural gas companies kind of screwed the pooch back in, I think it was like 79, and they got banned from
Mhm.
Kachemak Bay. And now Governor Dunleavy is deciding, well, maybe we should allow for the drilling of natural gas. Can you imagine how that's
Yeah.
going to play out?
Yeah, I will. It'll be interesting to see what
Yeah, I don't have
stories
anything to
spring
say
from
either.
that. Yeah, it seems like I like to read the news and then comment on it in my fiction. But
Yeah.
that's I love Prince William Sound. I love Kachemak and Resurrection, pristine, and you know, I love it out there. I hate to see it wrecked. So
Yeah.
it's a definitely a tug of war. That's for sure.
I mean, and Barbara, I mean, basically, I think what you're heading toward is where a writer is always looking for conflict. Conflict is what drives a novel, and in particular, a crime fiction novel. And
Right.
if you're writing about Alaska, if you're not writing about resource extraction, you're just writing a fairy tale.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Well, I mean, who are we
Exactly.
to talk? In fact, Arizona, has lots of abandoned mines. And I'm always ticked off every day is it the Wall Street Journal? I think there's always some ad about, this rare gem is going to be extinct and it's some version of
Mhm.
Arizona turquoise. And I think
Right.
if it's going to be extinct, you idiots, why are you trying to sell more of it, and just make it even
Yeah.
quicker? And then, of course, we have cyber ninjas at work here. And it's also unbelievable that honestly, don't you wonder sometimes if government is really doing what it's supposed to do anymore? Well, we won't go off into
Yeah, I
that,
don't know. I
but
don't- it's interesting that we were talking about extraction and mines, and one of the things in this book that I didn't even realize till I was doing some on the ground research in Southeast and Juneau. I mean, I knew the Tongass was a roadless area and that you couldn't punch a new road in, but I didn't realize that if somebody were to find an old road that existed that was punched in, even if it was completely grown over, if it was, they could find it on the plat, they could redo that road. And that's sort of the premise of this book. There was a road there years ago, an old corduroy road made out of old, logs and whatnot. And you slip a little money the right way and that road might meander where it didn't really meander, but it's an old road. So it's for a fiction writer that allowed me to add some conflict besides just the gold mine, but everything going to the gold mine, and which is really where a lot of the damage could be done, and slash and the kind of chemicals they use. That's one thing that when you mentioned the abandoned gold mine, now with chemicals and different things, they can get a lot more gold out of the ore. So some things are easier to it's easier to extract gold now from the same amount of ore that would have given you a minuscule amount. And so, when money's involved, people tend to get greedy, and that's what this explores.
right. Well, some of these abandoned mines are being, repurposed, so to speak, due to
Hmm.
um, more efficient equipment and chemicals and
Right.
all the rest of it. So, Mark, looking at the prologue, where you are with this book is you're roughly 30 miles south of Juneau by boat, and heading towards a mine edit known as Valkyrie 3, cut along the side of the mossy green mountain tucked deep into a glacial valley inside Port Snettisham.
Snettisham.
An inlet, pristine water South Stevens Passage. So this is a real place, right?
Well, the mine's not, but there are
Oh,
mines out there. And Port, I just, when I was going over I don't know how Dana does this because I've read most of her books, and I look for places that have cool, either I make the names up like Stone Cross, it's based on a real place. And I know some of her places are, I think you have it's like Non-Dalton or some place like that that's made up name, but I base them on real places. But Snettisham just sounds cool. It's a cool word to say, so I wanted to put something in Port Snettisham. It's just a cool word, so that's why it ended up there.
well, Dana's made up a whole park. So
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, right. So U.S. Marshal, why have you said that? I mean, I don't know much about Alaska law enforcement. What all of it I know is really from Dana and the people that
Other
work there.
writers too.
What?
Other writers too.
Well, but mostly from you, because you've got, I mean, Kate is a private investigator, but you have actual, like Jim and so forth, people who actually have law
Actual
enforcement
law
jobs.
enforcement. Yeah.
Yeah. So US Marshal, they're stationed in Alaska and then like they are everywhere else, presumably.
Right. Yeah, we have a office in we have offices. They're not staffed in Ketchikan and Juneau, and we did have office space in Nome, but we just weren't going up there very often. So I think we let that go back to general services. But our main component is in Anchorage, and then we have a smaller sub office in Fairbanks. But then we just deploy. We deploy the deputies from there and go out and work. Because Alaska is so vast, and because our missions overlap with Alaska State Troopers and other federal agencies, but particularly Alaska State Troopers, we really have a good working relationship with them, and we're out. It's not like the Tommy Lee Jones movies where the marshals strut onto the scene and say, "We're taking over your investigation." We would die if we tried that. We need help. We have to work with people, and we really pride ourselves in having a good relationship with other agencies. And so one of the captain of Sea Detachment, which is the whole western part of Alaska where the Yukon and the Kuskokwim sort of swoop down and out and make that YK Delta, that's the Sea Detachment. And as Dana well knows, that's like the size of Oregon, and there's a captain and a few troopers that handle it. And so whenever we could work, say, a warrant task force together and sort of go out to village and say, pick your quote unquote village terrorist, the person that's wanted, that is causing you so much trouble, that really is making life miserable for you out here. And we're going to spotlight those people and swoop through in a bunch of deputy marshals and troopers and take them to jail. They're wanted already, but we just don't have the resources and the personnel to go fly out to wherever and get them. So we worked very closely with the troopers, and because we did that over the years, it gave me a chance to see parts of Alaska that I never would have gotten to see, and it was amazing.
Mark, am I correct in thinking that federal marshals pursue federal miscreants?
True, except we also, because we have task forces, we can pursue whoever the state asks us to help with.
Oh,
and
okay.
So we have in task force fashion, because marshals are one of those, there's two agencies in the federal government that have, so let's say the DEA, they have the right on their credential card and everything. It says this person has the right to effect arrest and carry a firearm in the pursuant to their duties. Title 18 U.S. code, blah blah, and it lists the title of the types of crimes that they can investigate and their powers of arrest are for. Customs is the same way, and the DEA's was quite broad. Other agencies are quite broad, but they're still listed. The United States Marshals says enforce federal law.
Okay.
Everything, and the bureaus is the same way. And because we have the powers of a sheriff, then we can raise posses. So that's why when you see in the Olympics or other big events, then there's always a deputy marshal up there and a whole bunch of state and locals raising their hands and saying, yes, I swear to follow these rules, and now I'm a special deputy marshal for this period of time. And so we can swear people in with the approval of the attorney general, and then they go out in task force fashion. So that allows, when I write a story about a marshal, we don't investigate murders unless we happen to be there and the troopers say, hey, can you help us out here? And then we help out. And so it's really that's one of the reasons I love the job so much, because I've gone from spending 5 weeks in Florida helping out after Hurricane Andrew, just patrolling and being boots on the ground law enforcement, living out of a tent and eating MREs because everybody's houses were blown down, to standing on top of FEMA trailers with machine guns, to protecting witnesses, to heading out to Alaska to Chignik Bay to seize 30,000 pounds of frozen cod. So it's just different, and I
Talk
like
about a
that.
dangerous job.
Yeah, no kidding, no kidding.
So basically it's the variety that you
I
like.
like. Yep. I always tell people that, and I love being a novelist. I've wanted to be a novelist from the time I was 8, but it's the second best job in the world for me. I miss being a deputy marshal every day, every day.
Wow, so we're used to vast distances here in Arizona, and CJ writes about them in Wyoming and all, but it all pales against Alaska, where you've got so few people over such enormous territory. So Dana, when Liam Campbell on Spoils of the Dead, he takes up a new trooper post. How big is the area that he's going to be looking after?
It's loosely based on the Kenai Peninsula, and that would be the South Kenai Peninsula, basically from Soldotna south. I haven't looked up the square mileage of it yet.
It's
But
wild though. A lot of
It's
bears,
large.
a lot of bears per square inch down there around Funny River and
There's a
all that.
lot of
Yeah.
everything per square
Yeah,
inch.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we started out talking about, or I did, about archaeology, but Dana and Spoils of the Dead, there's an archaeological component to the story, which I thought was really fascinating. So how big a thing in Alaska is it to protect, native burial sites and what else is there that makes up archaeology in Alaska besides burial sites?
I don't know about all of Alaska, and there's a lot more attention being paid now to native burial sites. A lot more of them are being found. I think a lot of more investigation on the ground, probably as a long-term effect of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act that gave the tribes more money and more land so that they could protect and investigate what they have. It seems like I'm always seeing a story, God, at least once a month, if not more often. Mark, fact check me on this, about the discovery of another burial site. Also, that has a lot to do with global warming. They're finding a lot of them on the coasts because the coasts are crumbling and layers are falling away and burial sites are being exposed.
No,
So
that's
I
absolutely
think
right.
it's just like the tip of the iceberg, or so to speak. It's just,
Right.
I think there's a lot more to be found and a lot more will be found gradually over time.
Well, that's absolutely right. When I was doing research down in Southeast, there's a group down there called Juneau's Hidden History, and it's run by a guy named Brian Weed, and often we'll say, he's like the Indiana Jones of Southeast Alaska, but I mean that in a good way, not in a go rob the grave kind of way. I mean, if you look at it from one point, well, he probably does. He's a blacksmith, kind of a big bear of a man. He inspired the Tom Horning character in the book, but he just took me under his wing, showed me all around. But one of the things I really appreciate him is his sensitivity to the archaeology side of things. And there's some places, and he's quite an explorer, and he'll point out, okay, here's a mine. He's very open about maps of here's this and here's that. But he's the one that sort of got me onto he found this shaman's grave place, and he's very very aware that could be trampled, and it should be the Alaska Natives and the people that the Tlingit and folks there that should handle any, there really shouldn't be extraction. It's a grave, right? Why would we like it if they came and dug up our grandparents? But I really appreciate amateur, if you will, archaeologists like that are interested in the history, but not taking it for money. I mean, there's so much history, recent history, like Funter Bay. When I started doing my research and I learned about Funter Bay and what happened in World War II, it broke my heart. I want to write a whole book about it. Do you have to go?
Oh, no,
Dana?
no, I was
because I
looking for
wanted
the,
to.
I was looking for the title of a book,
ahead.
Crossroads of Continents. I don't know if you were familiar. This was
No.
quite a while ago. I'm dating myself. There was a huge exhibit, and I think it was put together by the Smithsonian, and it was for a long time. It was in the Anchorage Museum, and it must have been back in the 80s, I think. if not before then. And it was just this incredibly rich exhibit of Native artifacts, just like across tribes from all over the states. Just, I mean, an incredible eye-opener to the people who lived here first. And I remember reading a story some years after about how that exhibit had focused the attention of bad guys in the art world to the value of Alaska Native artifacts, and the theft of same ratcheted up like immediately thereafter. This stuff was being sold, you know, in New York and Chicago and wherever, all over the world, because suddenly it was valuable where it wasn't before, except to the people who lived here, of course.
Well, there are two
Right,
things it seems to me that
Well, any little
when
thing.
you're looking at an archaeological site and, you know, there are graves involved, you've got two things. You've got, you know, respect for the people that were buried there, their bones and all the rest of it. And then, you know, there was an act a while back, I don't remember what it's called, where, you know, repatriating bones that have been taken off to museums and so forth. And
Here
retrieving.
too. Here too.
Right.
They did
Well,
that here.
yeah, exactly. But then the other thing is the grave goods, you know, and, you know, people are not, I think, digging up graves in order to take the bones away, although once upon a time you could sell skeletons to like the Smithsonian or something, but they're looking for grave goods. It's sort of like pot hunting here. And that's what's valuable. I mean, you and I have been to Egypt, Dana, and, you know, we've seen grave robbing on a grand scale. Well, you know,
according to the guide, it was going on underneath our feet at Giza.
Right.
well, and now they've just found, as I mentioned to you the other day, they found 3 new sites in Egypt, you know, cities with tombs and, you know, all the rest of it. So part of it is the desire to study the past, you know, improve our knowledge, but a lot of it is just, you know, taking stuff. And
they're always, I mean, that's going to be there. I mean, talk about a source for tension for crime fiction novels. You know, there's always going to be some opportunist who comes in and thinks, well, this is just laying around. I can take this.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, without any thought for the culture or the history of the place. And, you know, it would be unfortunate if such a person came to a bad end.
Yeah, and that
in one of
our books.
Yeah, exactly. I really loved the Tony Hillerman books, and I spent some time down in with the Marshal Service working with some youth programs down in Arizona and southern Utah, down around the Blanding area, and spent a considerable amount of time with the Navajo holy man who took me into a sweat and did a lot of talking with me and sharing some ideas with me. But the most telling thing that we ever did together was walk through a field, and down there's pieces of pot and arrowheads and different artifacts almost under every tree. You can't walk in this Blanding area where we were. You couldn't walk 100 yards without finding 7 shards of pot, some sort of pottery, because that stuff lasts a long time. Like stuff we have up here, unless it's ivory, you know, a lot of that just goes away with time. But it was sacred to him, but it was also just part of life. And he didn't bend over and pick it up. It meant a lot more to him that it was just there. It was not something that you picked up and looked at. It was not something that you even bothered with. It was almost just part of his whole spiritual realm, was that he lived in a place where his ancestors lived and he wasn't going to bother it. And just watching him around it was pretty impressive to me. And I sort of tucked that away if I ever write a book about Navajos.
You could. Well, it seems to me too that one of the things that is maybe accelerating the value of plundering archaeological sites is that some of the material that was carved or otherwise used is becoming scarcer. I was saying to Dana before you came in, I'm wearing my walrus ivory necklace that I bought at Portage Glacier in the gift shop. And Dana has reminded me, in fact, you even wrote about it, I think in one of your books, that only natives can now do carving right and can sell on what?
Marine mammals, yeah.
Right. And
legally. Yeah.
Yeah, when we were in Greenland, analogously, on the Northwest Passage crew, it was interesting that if you went into any of the gift shops and they were selling, ivory or other sorts of things, the Canadians could buy it and take it home, but none of us United States citizens were allowed to buy anything. They looked at your passport, and if you were a US citizen, they
really?
wouldn't sell you any of that stuff because you couldn't bring it back into the
Because of
United
the
States.
CITES Treaty or whatever it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but anyway,
Mhm.
so if you're finding things in a site somewhere that are made of ivory and other things, then it's getting harder to find or even source it, then I can see it would put up the value. But Dana, in Spoils of the Dead, wasn't the archaeological site, wasn't part of the point of it that it was a trail or a road or
Mhm.
something? So, and what effect does that have if you find something like that?
It's the first thing you should do is down tools and call the local authorities, call the local tribe. But I think oftentimes that doesn't happen.
Right.
Right,
And
but
and a lot of the collections now are lodged in museums. And there's there's new stuff out there to be found, but the collection I based on was found by and written about by somebody local.
But when that was found, doesn't that mean that it halts whatever exploiting of that particular land might be?
It does under the rules now, but it wasn't when it was found. And I don't know when those rules came into effect. Mark, do you remember?
No, I'm not sure. A lot of it has to do with, I think it was post pipeline even. They're relatively
It is
new.
post
Yeah.
pipeline for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I
Relatively
remember
new.
I worked on the pipeline, and I remember going through training, and I remember some guy saying, he said it used to be, and this would have been probably 1973 or 1976, one of the two. No, 1976. And I remember one guy was doing the training. He was talking about what we were supposed to do when we were out and about. And he said, if you're plotting the line if you're going to dig a hole for a new construction camp, or you're about to put one in and you find a bear in a den, he said the natural inclination is to take a stick of dynamite and put the bear into orbit. He said, but you can't do that nowadays. So they were very cautious about the wildlife then, but there was never one word said about archaeological artifacts
Right.
pertaining to Alaska Natives.
Mhm.
Wow. So it's where every place in the world is being subject to more and more development. As you point out earlier, this is all grist to the crime writer, right? Because you're
Right.
running right into conflict and greed and, bad actors and
Mhm.
all the rest of it. I thought it was interesting, that both of you have written books that came out this year, where local archaeology and so forth is.
If Mark is like me, he picks his topics right out of the headlines, and there have been a lot of headlines lately about things like
Yeah,
that.
that's an interesting observation. But I'm sure Dana has this as well. I get new writers and then established writers that will give me a shout and say, "Hey, could I get you to read my manuscript and give me a cover blurb?" And I'm generally happy to do that. But if I'm writing a crime novel, then I'm a little more reticent to read, especially somebody that's still in the process of writing their book, to read a half-done manuscript, and because I'm always afraid they're going to think that I'm stealing their idea, because we glean things from the zeitgeist. I mean, this is a perfect example. We haven't spoken to each other about this, but we're both looking around at what's going on, and we get inspired generally the same way. We write different stories, but there's a lot a archaeological artifact that stops a road, that's pretty that's the same. So yeah, it's pretty I don't
Did
know,
a
coincidental, but
conversation.
not.
I did a conversation with Lee Child Monday night with Laurie King about the Mystery Writers of America new handbook for writing, but it came up and Lee sort of presented a challenge, and now we're going to see if we can make him follow through on it. But basically he said, if he wrote a first paragraph and then threw it out to like 20 authors, you would get 20 completely different stories.
True.
Even if you started with the same premise, here's
That's
what
true.
happened, but they would all be completely different
I believe that.
voices, different, development, different characters, and the whole bit. I mean, there aren't that many crime plots that are staggeringly original.
I was told by a literary teacher one time, there are only 3 plots: man against nature, man against man, and man against himself.
Yep, yep.
I'm not sure that that's absolutely true, but I've never forgotten
Pretty
it.
close, pretty close.
Well, you know, the premise of the mystery writers, because we did these back to back, that Michael Carita edited, which is really a great collection of stories, was he was quoting that the 2 plots were, I'm trying to remember something, but one was The Stranger Comes to Town, you know. So where is it? It was, it's Tolstoy. All great literature is one of 2 stories. A man goes on a journey, or a stranger comes to town.
Yep, that's Tolstoy.
And the stranger come to town one works better for crime fiction because, you know, the wagon starts circling or whatever it is might happen. And
Well, it's like what it's Mark and I have talked before, and it was like something that he said, and now I'm having a senior moment and not being able to follow up on that thought. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that the thing that makes, even though there's a finite number of basic plots, the things that I like reading, whether it's the same Stranger Comes to Town or whatever, are the little insights that each author has because of his or her own experiences. I judge a book about how much I like a book as a writer by how many sentences are in that book that I just feel I wish I would have written, that I'm angry that I didn't
Style
come.
matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Style matters.
I wish
Boy,
I would have
to me
written
anyway.
that. And with
Yeah.
Dana, I remember, I don't know how long ago this was. It's one of your older Kate Shugak books, I think. And I'm gonna wreck it. I apologize. But you had a sentence in there that was something like, if you're gonna fly Alaska Airlines, even if you're going to hell, you're going to have a 2-hour layover in Seattle. And
something
I
like
thought,
that.
yeah, something like that. And I thought, man, this lady knows Alaska, because everybody that's, you know, that had very little to do with the plot, but it certainly had to do with the setting. And it made me trust her that she knew what she was writing about. And as a newly minted, we've been here 22 years. So as a newly minted, I'm always going to be a chichaco to Dana because I've only been here 22 years, but, you know, a newcomer. But it made me want to read, you know, continue, because I thought, yeah, I can see that. And that's what makes these stories so great.
Let me just say one last thing before referring back to what Barbara said. I forgot who it was that you read from in that book that you just held up, but basically that is, Mark, don't you think that is a really good commentary that maybe even most crime fiction stories, maybe even most literature, either begins with an arrival or a departure.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely. It's a
Tolstoy.
journey. It has to.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and when you think about it, okay, if you arrive in a new place, then the narrator is the lens through which this new place is seen. And if you're leaving a place, then the place forms the experiences of that person as they go down this road, whatever it is in the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. That's the premise of every Arliss Cutter book, is basically the plot of Marty Robbins' Big Iron on His Hip. A stranger comes into town with a big iron on his hip looking for an outlaw. And that's the Arliss Cutter books boiled down.
So it's an Alaskan Western.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Really,
Absolutely.
I really like
Okay,
it.
guys, I'm gonna take off. I gotta
So good to
off
see
and
you.
do stuff. It's great to see you again, Mark. Miss
Same
you,
here.
Barbara. Give Nala a hug and a smooch for me when you're
will.
done.
Thanks, honey. Great to see you.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Dana. She's great. She's
She
great.
is great. I did think it was so striking that, you know, you both had books out this year, as I say, where archaeology is a big part. And in Dana's, it serves a different function. In yours, you know, you just know when you read this that this archaeologist is going to get crunched by the not particularly law-abiding or whatever crew. You know, you've got a former sniper driving some vehicle, and also you just know this kid is going to be toast when they unearth some bones. And it did occur to me, you know, that it seems really kind of criminally careless to send an archaeologist out on a working site unprotected. because, you know, it almost makes sense that if he finds anything or if they uncover anything and it's going to stop the project, that there would be a huge temptation to just like, you know, spot the guy out of existence and carry
Yeah.
him.
Fortunately, I think most mine operators and construction people are, you know, people that want to go home to their families and whatnot. So I don't think it, you know, obviously as a writer, we're looking at the worst case scenario. There's a, you know, what I did is I sort of looked at these characters as the kind of people with the sort of total lack of morals that would, you know, kill you for a cigarette. So obviously they're going to kill you for, you know, just sort of that, you know, I want to make them three-dimensional and fleshed out characters, but there are some really bad folks in the world,
Yeah.
whatever they're doing. And I just plugged them into being this guy that works for, I mean, obviously he is there in that job because the mine owner needs somebody like that. So
Well,
hopefully
he needs it.
they're not all that way.
No, of course not. He needs it because the law requires it. So he has to at least have a facade that he's
Right.
paying attention to. But,
Right.
you know, that doesn't mean that the guys that work for him who, you know, his paycheck and so forth or payoff is going
Right.
to depend on it are going to give a damn. So
Right.
what brings Arliss Cutter into this book? Because he's not there in these in
Right.
this opening scene.
So what I'm trying to do with each book is, because I as I mentioned earlier, I miss the Marshal Service so much. I enjoy the varied work, and we never have done. And I was with them for 22 years, so that's 30 years ago that I got on. We've never been very good at tooting our own horn. A lot of people don't know what the Marshal Service does,
Right.
and so I try to, with each book, Arliss is doing something that's not involved with a murder that he's going to eventually investigate. In the first book, he's gone down to arrest somebody that's a sex offender again in Southeast Alaska on Prince of Wales. In Stone Cross, in the second book, he's doing judicial protection along the Kuskokwim River with a judge that's going to do some arbitration. And I did that in Kaktovik with one of our judges, and one of them, luckily there weren't any murders there, but there was some tension and we were guarding the judge. And in this one, it has to do with a drug trial and a sequestered jury, where the jury is put off to the side and they just need that help. And so the chief deputy sends him and Lola Teariki down to help with the sequestered jury. And then there's murders ensue, and they're on site at the right time for it to happen. It's kind of in many ways, it's a, you know, I mean, it's fiction, but it's like Jessica Fletcher always happens to be in the right place at the right time to, you know, I'd move out of that little New England town if there was that many murders as there is in Murder, She Wrote. But so Arliss is, he happens to be there doing the regular Marshal Service job that I try to write about realistically. And then he gets involved assisting other agencies, which is what we really do.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, John Sanford's new book, Ocean Prey, he made Lucas Davenport a U.S. Marshal to get him out of just Minnesota and allow him to racket around the United States.
Mhm.
And this time he's in Florida, where 3 Coast Guard men are murdered, and the FBI just can't get anywhere. And so the U.S. Marshals come in and with Lucas, and it's interesting to see the interplay of, you know, the Marshals and the FBI. It's a really great book. I enjoyed it a
I haven't
lot. A
read
couple
that.
of them have been pretty grim, but this one, you know, there's always a body count and so forth. But in this one, John's sense of humor has come back, and I thought it was great. But like you, he is illustrating what the U.S. Marshals can do in a way that, you know, most people are probably unfamiliar with. I mean, we think
Right.
U.S. Marshal Witness Protection or whatever,
Right.
but it's a lot more. But they also do interact with other government agencies,
all the
you know,
time.
which I think is great. So tell me how writing and being a U.S. Marshal and writing about Arliss, this is your third book about Arliss. How does that play against writing the Tom Clancy books, the Jack Ryan Sr. books that you do?
Yeah, so I actually I wrote Westerns to begin with, and then I wrote a couple of thriller / mysteries that, you know, I was still kind of learning, but I wrote them set in Alaska, and they eventually became the Arliss Cutter books later on. But I broke off that when I really couldn't get any traction with those, my agent just couldn't sell them. went to the Jericho Quinn books, which are more geographic, geopolitical things. And the Jericho Quinns are what got me the Tom Clancy gig when Mark Graney read those and recommended me. So those Clancy books are a lot more technical. There's a lot more description of weaponry and geopolitics and global things, where but I really strive hard, as Mark did and does, to focus on character along with action. But with the Cutters, they're focused on one spot. There should be a more of a sense of place, and it gives me time to, where in the Clancy's, where I'm jumping from, in Shadow of the Dragon, I'm jumping from a submarine to Kazakhstan, to Western China, to Washington DC, and so I explore a bit of each place. But in the Cutters, they're enjoyable to me because I love Alaska so much. I love the cultures and the people so much, as you can see in Dana's books as well. So I enjoy being able to really explore what's unique about the state and how big it is. I mean, you've been up here, that it's so vast that you can never leave the state, and you can talk about sand dunes or old growth forests or desert, type and environments, or the northernmost rain forest, or Arctic, or really all kinds of different places. And some of those places might be 1,600 miles apart and still in the same state, if you stretch it all out, or volcanic islands. So I really like to not only explore what the Marshal Service is doing, but explore the different native cultures. I really have fallen in love with I have some just very dear friends in Western Alaska, Yupik native friends, and up in further north in the Inupiat culture, and then interior Athabascan culture, and down in southeast the Tlingit and Haida culture. They're so different, but also the same. And just being able to explore geography, weather patterns, the people, and drill down in my adopted state. I'm like Scrooge McDuck with plot, and I'm just reveling in all this matter that I get to play with.
It's a remarkable state. I'm very lucky that I have sailed from Seattle all the way around all of Alaska's coast, all the way up and around, and then out through the Aleutians, and then on up to Nome and over the top and down on the Canadian side, and then out the Northwest Passage all the way to Greenland.
I'm envious.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge coastline, and it's so different, when you start on the inside passage from Alaska. That was a different trip because we started the whole Northwest Passage thing in Seward.
Okay.
And it started in Seward, and then it went west, and it went all the way out through the Aleutians, and then back up it went. And it was great to go through the Bering Sea and, on up. And there's a beautiful, on the east coast of Alaska, facing Canada and going that way, there's that smoky stuff, there's a whole, and that was amazing. And the ship put drones up to take photographs of it, because you really can't see it that well from the deck.
Right.
But, so I thought exploring the entire Alaska coastline was a really remarkable thing. Patrick, let's call you back up from your dark place there and see if we have any questions or comments.
I see the poisoned pen icon.
Yeah, that's Patrick. He'll be along in a minute. Or not. He may have had to rush off and do something, but he'll be along. Right. So you're going to continue writing Arliss, right?
Yep. I actually already turned in the fourth book already. It's already in with the publisher. It'll be out next year.
I'm delighted to hear that. So Patrick, you got any questions or comments you'd like to feed us?
Yeah, there's one that just came in from someone named AJ, and he says, I would like to know Marc Cameron's writing process and how long he has been writing.
Well, I've been published about, 17 years, but I've written from the time I was a little boy, and wrote fan fiction about where the red fern grows when I think I was 9, 8 or 9. But I treat it like a job. You know, I write 2 books a year. So I get up in the morning and write for 3 or 4 hours and then maybe go for a walk or whatnot. Or like today, I watch my grandson, but I write almost every day. And just, I enjoy it. So I do, my process to write a book is I spend a lot of time staring out the window thinking, and then I spend a lot of time, I've got probably, on a Clancy book, I'll fill up about 17, 18 of these Rhodia pads. I write a lot longhand with my trusty Blackwing 602 pencils. I got about 150 of these on the desk, and I write a lot longhand, and it just makes my brain work differently. And I free write until I sort of, the thoughts evolve and congeal, and then I put those in the computer and just write. So I enjoy it. It's sort of a watching the movie in my head, and I try to leave off every day kind of on the backswing of a punch so that it's in the middle of the action. So when I get up in the morning and start writing again, then it starts with the action. And I hate to get up and write exposition. I would rather the exposition happen in the middle of my writing day. So and if I can't end in the backswing of a punch or some sort of action, then I'm using the punch figuratively, but some sort of action, a chase or whatever, then I think I'm doing it wrong because of the amount. I write about 2,000 words a day. And if I can't get to an action scene in 2,000 words, then I've made a grave error for the kind of books I'm writing.
They're what you're pacing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, shot
Exactly.
down.
The Clancy novels, you know, they've always been known for their very detailed descriptions of, you know, technology and weaponry and all that kind of thing. Is there kind of an unspoken rule about inserting a certain amount of that to please fans?
Not well. I mean, we talk about it a lot. They want a military set piece in each book and that sort of thing. And because my eldest son is in the military, so I can pick his brain periodically. And I have a lot of friends in the military. For this the book I'm working on now, I've been fortunate enough. COVID has sort of kept me at home, but I've been fortunate enough to have contacts with the Pentagon, and so they've put me in contact with NORAD, and they've answered a ton of my questions. And I think they have to vet me a little bit first, but I think I've been through some of that vetting, so they help me out. But the editor is very good about understanding where my strengths are, and my strengths are generally law enforcement and intelligence. So you'll see a sort of a shift in. Mark had a lot closer military friends, and he was out doing a lot of touring of bases and going to Poland and things like that. And where I try to travel overseas, my books tend to be like Without Remorse or Cardinal of the Kremlin or Some of All Fears, where there are military set pieces, but there's a lot of espionage. And so I sort of fill up my tank that way when it comes to a Clancy book, and still put in my, submarines and tanks, and very few tanks. I don't know much about tanks, but I try to put in the things that I am at least a little familiar with, at least enough to know the questions to ask. And then I can go to people and say, I generally know how a helicopter flies. Now walk me through it. I had a really cool experience being able to, through a joint civilian conference, I wrote about the Coast Guard in my first Clancy novel, Power and Empire, and a Coast Guard admiral read it and nominated me for a program called the Joint Civilian Orientation Conference. And they took 40 of us, and basically it's been going on for 40 or 50 years. And they showed us around the country. We went from base to base. We flew on charter airlines and went to San Diego and rolled around in the sand with SEAL instructors yelling at us. And you haven't seen anything funnier than a bunch of old folks like me. I mean, remember General Adignon? He's a Marine Corps general. He came up to me and I was covered in sand. In fact, if you look on Facebook, on my Facebook page, there's a sugar cookie picture of me where I'm rolled up in sand. I'm about to die from going in the water, doing push-ups, going in the water, doing sit-ups. And if you look close, there's tears in the sand of where I'm just so exhausted. And this is only for like 40 minutes, where the poor wannabe SEALs are doing it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And he walked up to me, and General Audignon, I think he's the Inspector General of the Marine Corps now, but he walked up to me and got right down on my face. And he was one of our helpers, and people that are helping us along. And he got down on my face and he said, "Mark, you are fat and you are old. Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I can't not do it, sir." And he said, "Outstanding," and walked away. That's the kind of thing that I try to insert in the book somewhere, is that not me, but that sort of gruff way. And then when I gave him a good answer, that was good enough for him, and he walked away being general-like. So I'm fortunate enough to meet good people. On that same trip, I got to fly on a V-22 Osprey, meet the young female pilot that she was like a squadron leader. And I've kept in contact with her, and she walked me through 3 of the chapters, or 3 of the scenes in Code of Honor were just pretty much verbatim me talking to her on phone and email, telling me what it was like.
It's
Wonderful.
really cool to see the camaraderie between you and some of the other guys who are currently writing Clancy and have written Clancy.
Oh yeah.
Like Greenie and now Don Bentley and Grant
Oh, good
Blackwood,
guys.
and there've
Yeah.
been a bunch of great guys. It's
They're
fun
fun.
to see you all together.
Yeah, it's fun to be together with them. They're good folks.
The Clancy universe really, well, it's like the Custer universe and the Parker universe. There are those few authors that really manage to create a whole world and characters in it, multiple characters and different facets that allow both readers and other authors, to still enjoy them.
been
I
fun.
just read the new Mike Lupica book for Robert Parker, who kind of let Sonny Randall die away because he was more interested, I guess, towards the end in Jessie Stone. And it's great to have Sonny back because I really liked her.
Yeah.
And Mike has really gotten Parker dialogue to the point where you think it might be Parker writing it. It's really
does.
funny.
Yeah.
And, I think it's great for readers as well as for writers that you don't have to let a special universe that an author created die with the author.
Yeah.
I'm
I'm glad.
These are all post life, situations.
Right.
I mean, Clancy is dead, Cussler is dead, Parker is dead. Tony Hillerman, Ann Hillerman is writing wonderful books
Right.
in the
She's
spirit
very
of
good.
her dad. And I think that's a really great thing.
Well, I
Anything
think you
else?
really hit the nail on the head when you said in the spirit of her dad. Tom Colgan, the editor of the Clancy's, and I chatted early on, and he said, because I was terrified, and I was a Clancy fan from the beginning, but I said, I can't try to copy his voice. And he said, I don't want you to. I want you to write a Marc Cameron book in the spirit of Tom Clancy. And that sure made it easier.
It does indeed. Anything else there, Patrick?
Yes. Well, before I ask that is really interesting and it seems very smart for the editor to play to your strengths, in subtle ways,
Oh,
Having you
Tom.
explain that is really interesting.
Yeah, Tom's a great editor to work with because these books are big books, and I'm sort of a neurotic guy to be a retired lawman, but he's talked me off the ledge several times because when you write, when you send a Jack Ryan book out into the wild, there's people just ready to rip your face off if you get something wrong, and so he's a great editor to work with.
Some of the questions that are coming through. Liza asks, she says, although you've retired from the U.S. Marshals Service, do you still have opportunities to act as consultant for the police force?
I don't act necessarily as a consultant, but I do. I talk with them all the time, and we trade. I was in Texas last week, mostly picking their brain and for the Clancy, but we chat back and forth, and I wouldn't say I'm a consultant. They can handle. I always wish that I was the kind of person that would be like, when the helicopters land and say, Arnold, we need you to come save the day. But there's so many capable people out there that that's sort of a fantasy. But I do keep my toe in the water and talk to the police department, Anchorage PD, other friends of mine, still talk to the Marshal Service. I do, if there's any consulting that had to be done, I would say if it's regard to Native issues in Western Alaska and the programs that this captain with the troopers and I, Steve Arlo is a captain in Western Alaska, and we started some youth programs out there and some rural programs, and I still assist with those a bit, not in any law enforcement capacity, but in a public safety knowledge kind of capacity. So I do that.
Let's see, Kathy says, I don't know if I missed this, but what took Mark to Alaska in the beginning? Was it work? Was it?
Yeah, I was already with the Marshal Service, but even when I was with the police department in Texas, I knew I wanted to go north, and I was in the process. I had applied, or I'd approached the Alaska State Troopers and Anchorage PD back in, this would have been in 88 or so. I approached, or 89, I approached about a job up here. I want to come up and be interestingly enough, the chief of police, we share kind of a common genealogy, I think. And so I had chatted with some of the detectives up here in Anchorage, and I was living down near Fort Worth, and they just wouldn't take me. You had to move. You had, at that point in time, you had to be an Alaska resident with an Alaska driver's license and have lived here for a year, or you couldn't get a job with the troopers or APD. And so the people that would take you was the North Slope Police Department. So I started my application process with North Slope, and that's Barrow and all the villages up there. Basically, the top third of Alaska is one municipality, and it's sort of like a mini version of the troopers as far as working in all these little villages along the top part of Alaska. So I started my application process with them, and I was about to go to Seattle for my polygraph and all of that stuff, and the Marshal Service hired me. So I put Alaska aside, went to, because I had applied to the Marshals 2.5 years earlier, and it just takes so long to get onto the Marshals. So I started with the Eastern, went to the training, started with Eastern District of Texas, worked there for 3 years, moved to Idaho for 3 years. My wife got breast cancer, my mother-in-law got breast cancer at the same time. So we wanted to get them close together, and she was in Calgary. So they both got better, but we got them together for those years in Idaho. And then I was on a protective detail for the foreign minister of China, leaving New York, and we landed in Alaska. And it was my first time here. I just absolutely, this would have been 96 maybe. And a friend of mine was already up here, and we talked. I went home, told my wife, we got to go to Alaska. It's time. We need to put in for a transfer. And she said to me, we are not going to Alaska. I love it here in North Idaho. We are not going to Alaska. And so I went back to work, and I made flip charts of all the benefits of coming to Alaska. There was an opening. I took it home, made my case, and 2 months later we were in Alaska. And it was in 1998. So
it took you a long time, essentially.
Yeah, but it's always my goal. I mean, I wanted to move to Alaska since I was a little boy. And so I sort of wangled but she did sort of draw the line at Anchorage. We're not going any further north than she's a Calgary girl anyway, so the cold does not bother her. But we're stopping here.
Got it.
Wow.
Anything else, Patrick?
How cold is Anchorage compared to Idaho? Is it about the same, or is it much colder?
You know, this last winter, it was incredibly cold for a long time. We just got back from Texas, and most of the snow is gone, but we still have a couple of large patches of snow in our yard. But just 2 weeks ago, when we left Anchorage to fly to Texas, flying for the first time in a couple of like 16 months, it was 14 degrees when we left home, but it was jacket weather out there now. I think it was 48 this morning when I went to the dentist, and that's balmy. But Anchorage is actually, we have the Japanese current, so we can get 80 degrees in the summer, but that's a hot day. People like don't drink coffee when it's 78 because it's too swelteringly hot. But Fairbanks can get super hot and it can be brutal cold. Anchorage, sometimes it's colder in Chicago than it is in Anchorage in the winter or whatever. But
Boy,
the thing,
Texas sure went through an ordeal this last
oh
winter.
yeah, they did. They really did. I got lots of emails and Facebook comments like, take your weather back, but it's funny. It was horrible what happened to them, because they, if you're not prepared for it and you're not ready for it. I remember during the snowpocalypse, actually it wasn't even the snowpocalypse. It was they had a little dusting of snow in Washington, DC, and the headquarters office is closed in DC, and they put out a Marshal Service wide email saying, we've had some like 3 inches of snow and roads are bad, and rightly so. I mean, they don't have the equipment to move snow off the road, so they closed the office. And then a couple of weeks later, my chief, who I just dearly love, her name was Wanda Phillips. She's got quite a good sense of humor, and we were having a horrible spell of weather. And she put out an email, which I would have gotten in trouble for doing this, but she was well loved among the brass, that she could put out a Marshal Service wide email, and it said, FYSA, for your situational awareness, like FYI. The National Weather Service has issued a weather warning for Anchorage and surrounding areas, 22 below zero ambient temperature, minus 51 wind chill. The winds on the hillside are going to be gusting to 70 knots, and beware your electricity might go out, and there will be some precipitation. And then she wrote a little note below it that said, and just wanted you to know we're open and all at work. And I think it really made an impression on me, like, yeah, we're Alaskans, we can handle this. So that's the way I want Arliss to be.
Oh, well, there he is. Good job. Right. So Patrick, is that it?
That's a great note to end on.
It really is. So I want to apologize to everybody for screwing up the start time. Thank you for hanging on. For some reason, I flipped to Alaska time where it's 5 o'clock when we started. Yeah, well, just the way it is. Every once in a while, I have a senior moment. But thank you very much for sticking with us. Mark, it was lovely to see you. For those of you who don't know Dana Stabenow's work, we really recommend the Kate Shugak series. There are 22 of them. And Liam Campbell has 5 books, all of them back in print. They're quite different, but they're all Alaska. So if you want to read more about Alaska, they're great places to go. And you already heard Mark say, good news, that there will be a 4th Arliss Cutter book out next spring.
Yep.
And we'll probably see Mark in December, one way or another, because
Hope so.
it's when the Clancy's come out, right? So it's wonderful. Anyway, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks so much. And don't forget that, let me hold it up. Bone Rattle is the book that we've been talking about, and we definitely recommend it. That's it. Have a good weekend.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Patrick.
Take
A
care.
pleasure.